Hello, Patriots, friends, family, viewers. Thank you for taking the time to visit us today at Sergeant Troy's. We're going to have a short video today on fire making. This is a springboard off of an earlier video. It has to do with our bug out bags, why we pack what we do. There's three basic things you have to have for fire. You have to have heat, you have to have air, and you have to have fuel. Kind of think of these things as a three-legged stool. If one leg is shorter than the other, you're not going to have a perfectly balanced fire. Having said that, we put things in our bags to make sure that we can build a fire. Now, the question is, why fire? Well, fire is important because it helps us to make water potable for human consumption. We have to make sure that we can cook whatever food that we have with us. But it's also great as a mental boost. Whenever you're stressed and you're in a bad situation and you need to stop and think about your situation and kind of get your mind focused on one thing, fire is a great way to do that. Most of the things that we have in our bags, we try to make sure that an underlying theme is that things are multifunctional. So you may see the same things in this video that you'll see in other videos. It's the same product just being used in a different way. Quick example of that is going to be the cloth that we used in the last video. I mentioned that it was 100% cotton, which is important because cotton has certain characteristics that are different from synthetic fibers. As it applies to fire, you can use this to reach into the fire and pull things out that are hot or place things into so you don't get burned. It can be used to, if you do get burned, you can put clean water on this and put it on a wound, and that's going to help give you a little bit of relief. But you can also turn this into char cloth. Now that's a little bit more advanced, and if we get enough interest, we may do a video on that later on, but you can do your research and find out. But that's why it's so important that we carry a big piece of cloth that really is 100% cotton. Other things that we have that are multifunctional is going to be like our saw that we talked about before. This one is exactly what we used last time. The reason I like these saws is because if you're going to use a ferro rod, which is a ferrocerium rod, you hold this rod, you have to have a piece of carbon steel to scrape along it so it throws sparks into your fire if you're not using matches or butane lighter. These saws are great for that because they have a high carbon content. Also, they have a 90-degree spine on the back, which makes a very sharp edge, which makes it a lot easier to scrape those sparks off of those ferro rods. Now, you can accomplish the same thing with the knives that we also had in our bag. This is a Moro knife. This is a carbon. When you get these, you can do a couple modifications yourself to increase these. I really do hate to see people using the blade itself whenever they're trying to build fires because the edge of this knife is perishable, just like the skills that you use in the wilderness. If you don't use those skills on a regular basis, you don't keep them sharp. If you're not careful with this blade, the sharpness of this blade is going to degrade over time. And if you're scraping it against a ferro rod, you're going to have a dull blade in this little short section, which is really the most important part of the knife that you use whenever you're making small things like trips and triggers, crafting things. You really do use this part of the blade a lot. So I hate to see that being used. So what you do is you can take a file and you can work the back of this spline, and this spline will become a 90-degree, much like the saw. And now what you do is you just turn this knife around and you use the back. So now you're able to throw sparks with your ferro rod, but it's also good for creating tinder. I can take a big piece of dry wood and I can use the back of this blade to scrape it to get the dust that I need in order to throw a spark. I know that's a little bushcrafty. Not everybody's going to be into the bushcraft thing. And to be honest with you, whenever it's cold outside, my fingers are numb, I'm not going to be wanting to throw sparks with a ferro rod, which is why I always carry a butane lighter with me. Butane lighters are cheap, they're inexpensive, you can buy them just about any convenience store anywhere. So I always recommend that you carry a butane lighter with you as a primary source to build a fire. The downside of a butane lighter is that they do run out of fuel. However, when you spin the wheel, it'll still throw a spark, so you still do get a spark out of it. And sometimes they don't work as well in cold weather. Now, if cold weather is not an issue for you, don't worry about it. But if it is an issue, make sure you keep that butane lighter in a pocket next to the body so that that body heat can keep that butane functioning even in cold weather. Another thing that we recommend people carry are matches. Now, matches are kind of unique in that matches have changed over the years. Nowadays, when people use matches, they think about book matches. They think about going to the store, buying a strike on the box match. There's nothing wrong with that, except that those boxes do get wet, and when they get damp, you try to use a match on them, what will happen is it'll just strip the top right off of it, and you won't get a fire, and you're going to be frustrated. For that very reason, I recommend that you find a strike on the box matches. Now, Yuko is the supplier that we use because they have an amazing assortment of fire starting tools. This is just a basic match. This is not a strike on the box. This is a strike anywhere. Why is that important? Because the sandpaper on the side may very well get damp like what we talked about, but you can take that match and you can use a metal zipper and you can strike it on a metal zipper. I don't know if you ever remember the old cowboy movies where they would take a match out and they would strike it on the side of their pants. Well, in those days, they had rivets on the side of their blue jeans, and so that match head would actually light right off of that rivet. So it's a strike anywhere. So I recommend at a very minimum, that's what I would do, is use a strike anywhere match. The next step up from that is what they call a stormproof match. I usually refer to these as lifeboat matches. Same thing. Basically what you have is you have a match that's in a box just like a regular match, but it has a huge head on it. The head is important because this is what is going to give you that extra time that you need in order to build your fire. So as you can see here, we have a typical wooden match, but look how big this thing is. And this is like a miniature railroad flare. You like one of these things, they last for probably a couple minutes. You can take them and literally dip them in water, pull them back out, and they'll reignite. They have limitations like anything, but this is a really important piece of kit. Now, if you notice, these come in boxes and they put them in a plastic bag. They also put extra strikers in a plastic bag, and they put that inside the box. Now, the box is a great idea. There's no reason that this can't be inside of a backpack with everything else that you have that is protected from the weather. But they also sell what we used to call a match safe. And it looks like this. This is one of their products here. This one's been used a little bit. And the way it works is it's a sealed container. If you notice, this has an O-ring around the top of it. And here are the matches inside. And if you notice how big these are, these are like a handheld flare. Inside of this will be several of these, and you also have some replacement strips. These strips are important because if you notice on the side here, you can actually remove this strip whenever it gets worn, and you can put a new one in it with the spares that are inside. Something else you may notice is we have a bright orange piece of cord. Now, that's important because if you're rooting around in your bag in the middle of the night, low visibility situation, you want to be able to see your match safe. So I always like to leave long pieces of brightly colored cord on almost everything that I have. It helps me because different colors are for different things, whether it's my knife or it's my saw or whatever, but that's just something to kind of keep in the back of your mind. When you buy these, they come like this on a little card. And as you can see, you open them up and they pack it with a cotton ball. Now, remember we talked about the 100% cotton before. The reason that's important is because it serves a couple purposes. One of which is that it protects the tops of the matches so that they're not rubbing against each other and igniting inside the safe. The cotton is important because this cotton can be fluffed out. You can open this thing up quite a bit. And what will happen is once it's fluffed out, you can take your sparks or your match or whatever you're using, throw it in there, and it will actually burn a lot longer. Now, if you want to extend that burn even more, you can actually take some paraffin, petroleum jelly, Vaseline, and you can mix that with your cotton balls. And now you've extended that burn time even longer. Why do we worry about extended burn time? Because whenever the weather is nasty and you're trying to build a fire, what you want more than anything else is to get that fire started. And you don't want to have to light several matches to get a fire started. You get your cotton balls lit, it's going to burn for a couple minutes, it takes the pressure off of you. You start feeding the little teeny tiny pieces to it. You start with the dust. Then you start with pieces that are about the size of a toothpick, and you just easily work your way up until you have branches that are big enough to put your thumb on. And once you have a pretty good fire started there, then you can put heavier pieces on it. I don't recommend a fire any larger than you need. These big, huge bonfires are pretty useless because you can't sit close enough to the fire to get any use out of it. And it also wastes a lot of fuel. It takes calories to collect fuel sources, and you don't want to waste those calories. So you have to be very economic with that. So again, this is just a quick video. We're talking about fire. Remember, it takes a heat source, it takes air, which is actually oxygen, and it takes fuel. There's several ways to do that. Don't just go with the bushcraft stuff, although I carry a ferro rod with me constantly. Make sure that you're using modern equipment when you can. Butane lighters, matches, railroad flares, any of those things can build a fire. Again, thank you for joining us today at Sergeant Troy's, and come back to see us for our next video.